to a slim webinar entitled Policy Audits and Beyond, Creating Effective Library Policies Step by Step. Thank you for your attendance. I know this is a difficult time for all of us, but we're librarians and we are going to succeed. It's probably best for people at the moment to mute your microphones and to mute your video. Simply it cuts down on bandwidth and helps other people out. If at any point you have a question, please do stop and ask me. Unmute yourself and ask, or put something in chat. Please know that once I've moved, because of my computer setup, once I've moved to the PowerPoint, I actually can't see the chat. So I have slim help assisting me with this who are looking at the chat. But if you have questions or concerns, please do unmute yourself and jump right in. We're absolutely fine with that. And we will set off and see how far we can go. So I have a brief outline for you here. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about who I am and why I'm conducting this webinar. We're going to ask why we're here. I think we will all agree to some extent. Then we're going to look at what is policy and why we need it, and what is a policy audit and how do you conduct one, and then how do we create and maintain good policy. And depending on our time, we'll get to what policies should I have. So that's the outline of where I think I'm going today, and off we will go. So first of all, my name is Andrew Smith. I am a librarian. I am also a board member of the Emporia Public Library and an associate professor at the School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State University. So I'm seeing this from three angles, if you like. So I'm not just a theoretician. I work on this from a board angle. I've worked on this from a librarian angle. So I have some insights into what's going on and what we need to consider. I also have rather a long association in working in nonprofit organizations. So I have a lot of experience working with boards, a lot of experience working with governmental organizations and complying with regulations. And that's sort of my background, and how I got into this, I suppose, is because anytime you get a new director in a public library, they start looking and saying, what do we need to do? And very often you discover a lot of your policy is perhaps not where it should be, and you want to start looking. So I joined the board of the Emporia Public Library 4 years ago when they were just starting a process of reviewing their entire policy catalog, if you like. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So I've done an awful lot of this in the last several years. So why are all of us here? I think the point is that strong policies ensure smooth library operation. And note, I say strong policies. And what I mean by strong policies are policies that actually say what we need them to say, and that give us the latitude to be librarians and to do all the things that we know as librarians are the right thing to do to provide information services to our communities. So strong policies ensuring smooth library operations. Policies also provide protection from unreasonable behavior. Now, it would be lovely if everybody who walked into a library behaved the way you behave. We would never have any problems, but we know that's not the case. But you must have policy that says what your expectations are. And that's what you use to ensure that behavior in the library is reasonable, or if somebody insists on being unreasonable, that you can take some measures to preserve the peace and service of your libraries. Here's the next thing. Situations change and your policies must change too. I think too often we have a policy and we're all slightly frightened of policy. So, or we have a policy for that, but no one's actually looked at it in a long time to see what it really says and whether in fact you're doing things in accordance with your policy. A rather fun situation from Emporia State University, and this is a couple of presidents ago, but the president asked about doing something and was told in all seriousness that we couldn't do that because of our policy. And he stopped for a second and said, whose policy is it? Is it ours? Is it some external legal requirement? Oh, it's our policy. He said, well, but if it's our policy, we can change it. It's ours. It's not designed to restrict us. It's designed to free us to be able to do what we need to do. My next point is that inadequate or non-existent policies leave both staff and board vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. If you don't have proper policy, then any decision you make as a staff member, as the library director, or as a board is open to the charge that it is capricious and unreasonable, because there is no policy, there is nothing written down. And so you don't ever want to be there. The majority of lawsuits, should you get into them, the courts are much less concerned with the actual content of your policy, unless it is illegal. But what they are concerned with is whether you have a policy and whether you followed it. And if you have a policy and you followed it, then that is usually your defense that we are treating everybody fairly and equitably. We have a policy and we followed our policy in whatever the situation is, whether it is a personnel matter, whether it is a request for a reconsideration of materials. But if you don't, then everything is an individual case and every decision you make is based on what? Particularly if you have a challenge to materials and you do not have a policy. First of all, if you don't have a collection policy, and then if you don't have a reconsideration policy, then everything to do with that request for reconsideration or challenge becomes a personal target on the librarian because there's nothing else. The point about policy is it's a board function. The board creates policy and the library director and staff implement that policy. And that is the defense for every library member on the front lines who has to deal with an irate customer is, yes, I can help you, but that is library policy. And here it is in writing. And then that diverts the problem to an inanimate object, i.e. the board. And so you always want to be thinking about this. It's for the protection of staff and board. So how do you actually manage this process? Oops, hit the wrong thing, sorry. So first of all, what is policy? And for the purposes of today, I really like the first and the last definitions here. All the definitions are fine. They're from Merriam-Webster online, but I like the first one, prudence or wisdom in the management of affairs. I think we as librarians tend to be exceptionally reasonable people. We treat people as we would wish to be treated. And it usually does not cross our minds that other people are not quite so reasonable and do not treat each other in that way. And so it is prudent for us to have policy that states how things are going to be. Also, look at the second definition, a high-level overall plan, embracing the general goals and accepted procedures. Now, I'm going to say later that I want you to keep procedure out of your policy as much as possible, because that's not really the concern of the board. I actually don't care how the staff at the front desk manage the process of taking bookings for meeting rooms. That really is of no interest to the board. What is of interest to the board is if we have meeting rooms, who can use them? Are we providing these equitably in our community? For what purpose? And if there are any restrictions on activities. Those are policy decisions. How somebody would book a room, the length of time they can book a room, how often they can book a room, those are really all procedural things that I would want the staff to deal with at their level rather than being at the board level. And this also, I think, is important because it means if you get procedure out of your policy, you're much better able to respond to change, respond to different needs than if everything has to keep coming back to the board to be redone. So what provokes policy? I said provokes on purpose. First of all, there may be legal requirements for policy. CIPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act. And I know quite a few of you are in Kansas, quite a few of you are not in Kansas, so you would want to refer to your own particular legal framework, but certainly in Kansas, there is a specific Kansas statute that requires certain actions be taken by public libraries to protect children from exploitation and exposure to pornography online. You may also have legal requirements for weapons, such as concealed carry laws, which is an issue in Kansas. You obviously should have policy that governs basic library operations. So I've suggested here a library card policy. Who can get a library card? And what do they need to do? Under what circumstances? And then a circulation policy. How is that going to work? Again, I don't want to go too much into the procedures in my circulation policy, but I do want the basic principles to be there. You want policy for unreasonable behavior, to put limits on it. So you want a code of conduct. You might also want an internet and computer use policy. So what can people do on your machines in the library? And notice that that is actually different from Children's Internet Protection Act. And then I've put in another category here that I've called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And under that, I'm suggesting things like your collection development policy. So what goes into your collection, what comes out of your collection? How do you determine that your collection is in fact serving your population? And then a meeting room policy. Who can use it and under what circumstances? So first thing is, let's get this very straight on roles and responsibilities. It is the role and responsibility of the board of directors to adopt written policies to govern the operation of the library. Kansas statute specifically says that the role of the board is to make and adopt rules and regulations for administration of the library. So that is a board function. That is their primary function. The board also is responsible for hiring the library director. The library director is responsible for hiring and managing the staff, and the staff develop procedures to implement the policy. But this is the hierarchy. This is how it ought to be set up. Notice I say ought to be, because I have talked to a lot of very nice and genuine and wonderful volunteers who serve on boards of directors of public libraries who do not understand that their primary function is to create policy for the library. They're quite surprised when they hear that. But this is important, and it's important again because it means that the staff and the library director should not be subject to personal attack based on a policy. If anybody wants to attack the library or attack materials, they're going to have to attack the board, not individual people. And I've heard quite often, I'll just say this here, quotes such as, oh, the city policy covers us. Yeah, that would be really interesting. When I hear that, I think, first of all, I don't think you actually understand what a library policy really is. And secondly, do you actually know what the city policy says and does that and how it applies to your library? So you need to know. Now, it may be that the city policy does cover you, but you need to be 100% sure that it does and 100% sure that you know exactly what the content of that policy is. We'll talk about a specific policy later on that I think is especially important to understand. It's at the foundation of librarianship, and I'm not really sure that cities' policies would cover that. And the other thing here is, I'll just put this in as an aside, this is the proper chain of command, if you like. It also means that when you're thinking about things like requests for reconsideration of materials, you want there to be a process where it goes, first of all, the staff can help, but then it goes to the library director for a decision or a committee for a decision. And then there, if you like, there's an appeal to the board of directors. I wouldn't want things to go straight to the board because then you've got no way of appealing to anyone. So there's a chain of command. Look to policy to use that chain of command to give you different levels of review if those are required. Now, what's a policy audit? That's supposed to be the whole purpose of this. Well, simply an audit is a methodical examination and review. So a policy audit is simply a methodical review of your library's policies. There's nothing magical about it other than it's methodical. And I think that's part of the thing where people get a little panicked by policy or by the idea of a policy review. It's methodical. It means we're going to do it step by step. Everybody can do it. It's not complex. So the first step of a policy review is to review your existing policies. That seems very straightforward. I mean, it's overly simplistic in some ways, but I think you would actually get quite a shock if you haven't looked at policy in a while and you set out to see, first of all, what policies do you already have? Next thing is, where are they? And I'm not being facetious when I say this. A lot of people seem to have policy on a sheet of paper in a filing cabinet in the director's locked filing drawers, and nobody's seen it in 25 years. That really is not a good place to be. Your policies need to be upfront and available if they're going to be any use. Otherwise, how do you know you're following policy? Next thing is, how old are your policies? You can look at policy and discover there's no date on it at all. One of the things I'm going to suggest to you in a few minutes is that you date every single policy you do, and when you reaffirm it or change it, you change the date so that you always know how recently a policy was reviewed or changed. What is missing from your policy? And then what is essential? What must you have that you don't have? And some of this I'm going to say is, do you have all the policies that are required by law? And legal requirements, Children and Internet Protection Act would be a legal requirement, but there are also federal requirements for protection of personnel records. There are federal requirements for family leave. Those are all in there. Are you covered? Now, those are things where, depending on how your library is organized, if you are part of the city, for example, the city may very well have a family leave policy that is completely in accordance with federal regulations. But do you have a copy of that? Do you have the correct materials posted? Because federal law doesn't just require a policy, it requires posting of certain parts of that policy everywhere that the policy applies. Then also, what is desirable? What do you not have that you think you really should have? And then, are your policies really policies, or are they, or do they include procedures? And if you remember, I said a little bit earlier, I wanted not to have procedure in my policy if I can avoid it. So I think it's best if policies are general guidelines for the management of various aspects of the library, and procedures are the steps you take to implement your policies. It really, truly is better to have procedures separate from policy so that you can change procedure without reference to the library board. You can also create different or multiple procedures to cope with different situations. And you can change procedures as circumstances change. For example, you get a new library software program that requires you to do things a slightly different way. You really don't want to have to send that back to the board to approve a new way of doing something that's still falling under the overarching principles of how you issue library cards or to whom you issue library cards. Also, do you have new items in the collection? By this, I'm thinking of things like starlings, the late lamented starlings that are no longer with us, or hotspots. Do those really need to go to the board, or can you fit that into your collection development policy because you've used categories? And so that's fine. I can get new items. Every time I get a new type of thing, I don't have to change my policy with the board. So that's really my thing. I'm going to harp on this a lot because very often when you look at policy documents, there's a barely there policy statement and reams of procedure. Now, it's not that you shouldn't have procedure, and it's certainly not that you shouldn't have written procedure. That is an excellent practice. But remember that your written procedure is at the staff level. It's what the staff have created in order to implement the board's policy. So let's get to the main part of writing policy. So the first thing is to think about this, to prepare for this. You want to identify your areas of necessity and prioritize. You cannot do it all at once. That really is a recipe for disaster. Don't even try. Start simply. First of all, are you in compliance with legal requirements? That's the very first thing. The feds or the state are the people who are going to come after you if somebody complains that you're not following state law or federal law. So get those ones done first if you are not currently in compliance. By the way, I wouldn't have a huge board meeting and have a large discussion item, non-compliance with federal family leave policy. I don't think that's smart. I think you do what you can to remedy any legal requirement deficiencies as you can, but don't make a huge deal about it, just set about doing it. Then the next thing after you've dealt with legal requirements is what is essential? What really is essential to the day-to-day running of your library? And then after you've done that, what is desirable? and then create a manageable timeline for policy creation or revision. And it's not unreasonable to look at reviewing one policy per board meeting. If you're okay on the legal requirements, you may also want to select a simple policy first in order to help your board get acclimatized to policy change if they're not familiar with it. If they don't fully understand their policy role, part of what you have to do as a library director or as a board chair is educate them in that role. So no harm in doing something with a simple policy. A simple policy might be something more in terms of a meeting room policy, or I'm actually struck here because I've just been thinking about how complex the Emporia Public Library policies were when we were looking at reviewing them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But there are simple policies, or you may have a very straightforward weapons policy. It may be helpful to convene a subcommittee of the board to look at policy, so that you're not trying to write policy in a huge board meeting. You shouldn't actually be trying to write policy in a board meeting anyway. But very often it's helpful if you can bring together a smaller subcommittee to work through this, especially at the beginning. And that also helps the board understand that they have very direct input into this. Don't forget to educate the staff of the library, both on the process of creating policy and reviewing policy and giving them input. They should always have input. So how do you actually create policy? What's the process? Well, the best process is probably if the director drafts a policy. Now, do not sit down with a blank piece of paper and say, I'm a novice, I don't know how to do this. Search for help. There are templates, there are examples galore. Unfortunately, there are also lots of non-examples, but use your state library as a resource. If you have regional library systems, use those as resources. And you also want to make sure you solicit staff input, you solicit input from your policy subcommittee and from the board as a whole. It should be a collaborative process. Remember, the goal of policy is to make everybody's life easier. It is not to restrict you. It is not to prevent you from being a real librarian. It is to give you the protections to allow you to be a librarian to the fullest extent. Once you've drafted a policy, and I'll just put in a plug here, it is absolutely fine to contact a similar library who has policy and say, we really like your meeting room policy. Would you mind if we borrowed that or if we took that wholesale? Heavens above, we are librarians. We are the last people to say, no, you utterly can't do that. We have never asked for help and been turned down. So don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of good policy out there, but make sure it's policy of a sort of library that is similar to yours in organization, in size, and in structure, how it works, so that you're using a policy or starting with a policy that is very likely something that will work for you. Once you present it to the board, don't be scared to rework it. Just because it comes up for board approval doesn't mean there shouldn't be questions and doesn't mean you might not suddenly realize you didn't think of something. So an Emporia example here, we are currently investigating, or the library staff is investigating, how to issue library cards to people online to use our online resources. Now, technically, within our current policy, that is not strictly allowed. because, foolish board, we did not consider the possibility of pandemics and shelter-at-home orders when we created the policy or we last revised it. Now, my response to that as a board member would be, there is a very clear intent in the policy. If the library staff follow the intent of the policy, the board will support them and we will ratify that as soon as we're allowed to meet again. And we may indeed want to look at, do people physically need to walk into the library in order to be registered for a library card? Now, there may be reasons why we do want that in normal times when people are able to do it. But that gave us some pause this week. So even libraries that are being diligent with policy or working through policy can't imagine everything. So don't be scared to rework things either before you adopt it for the first time or after you've adopted it. It's not difficult to redo. And also to make little changes should not be a big effort. So don't be scared to do it. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign that you got it wrong. It is a sign that you are being a proactive board in giving your library staff the best possible policy they can have to do their jobs. After you have approved policy, the minute the board approves it, that is your policy, you need to implement it. And part of the implementation should be to publicize that policy. And the first part of publicizing the policy is to communicate to your staff. The staff needs to know what the library policies are. And then you should also publicize it on your webpage and or as required. Remember I said earlier, some things like Family Leave Act have specific display requirements for documentation regarding your policy on family leave. So you must comply with those. So I've put all this in one slide because it's not difficult. It's not complex, but it's frightening if you haven't done it before. It's intimidating because you're thinking, he keeps talking about legal requirements. I'm not a lawyer. Understand that. You don't need to be a lawyer, but usually the legal requirements will be extremely specific as to exactly what you need to do. If you need help, go to your city attorney, ask your city attorney for help. How do we do this? Or here's our proposed policy in light of this. Does this in fact cover it? I've said this before, I will say it again. When I'm talking about templates and examples, do not accept everything blindly just because it is on a certain website. I have made my concerns known to the State Library of Kansas, but for example, the State Library of Kansas offers a template of what they say is a policy in compliance with the Children's and Internet Protection Act. And a lot of Kansas libraries took that, inserted their name, and they have that as their policy. I think it's 100% flawed because I don't think it is a policy. There's an introduction section that says what the law requires them to do. There's a section that says what to do if you object to it, but there isn't actually a section that says what the library will do or is doing. So that's one template that I think is flawed because I don't think it is a policy. I think it's describing policy. It's not an actual policy statement. So if it doesn't look like a policy to you, it maybe isn't. And then once you have policy, what you want to do is create a plan to review every policy periodically. Now, again, this should not be a huge burden. If you think about 3 years as a reasonable time frame to review policy, Make sure if something has a legal requirement, there may be a more frequent policy review required, or Children's Internet Protection Act in Kansas does in fact have a 3-year requirement for review. So, also encourage your board and your staff to suggest policy changes as needs arise. Remember, it's your policy. You can change it. Policy should serve your library population. It should not straitjacket you to where you can't do reasonable librarian things. But the one thing I would suggest is try to avoid policy change for single events, unless your policy is flawed. Now, if your policy is flawed or is missing a chunk, then by all means put it in. But if you have one single event that for some reason falls outside your policy or goes in contradiction to your policy, before I start changing my policy, I would look and say, is this something where the director or the board should simply grant an exception? Because this is a once in 100-year event, and that's what we want to do, rather than diluting a policy or making the policy so wide that in fact there is no policy there. So just be aware of the single event exception. It's fine to have exceptions. That's why library directors have authority. It's why the board has authority. You can always make an exception to your policy if it is needed or required under certain conditions. But you maybe don't want to have a policy that is so wide it allows anything. Now, publicizing your policy. Your policy should not be a secret. Post your policies online, on your webpage. Now, there are some policies that you probably don't want to post online. I wouldn't post my policies, I wouldn't post my employee handbook online. That's not something that the general public needs to see. I would not necessarily post my family leave policy online. That's for staff. But things to do with meeting rooms, things to do with intellectual freedom, to do with confidentiality of library records, my collections policy, all those things I think should be on your webpage. Remember to post things prominently in the library if it's legally required, and have paper copies available at the circulation desk. Remember to educate staff and volunteers. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone has to be able to quote policy word for word, but it means the volunteers in your library understand that everything they do is governed by library policy, and if anyone wants to see it, then they know where to send them to be able to see their library policy. Some things to consider. Keep procedure out of your policy documents. Include approval statements on all policy. And by authority and date, I mean approved by the Library Board of Directors on March 26, 2020. So that there is an authority statement that's reminding anybody looking at that policy that it's coming from the library board. It's not the staff, it's not the director, it is the library board who have authorized that policy. And then the date it was created or affirmed or reviewed. Try as much as possible, and this is challenging if you have a lot of policy documents that were created over a long time, but try to make your policy documents consistent in structure and design and also in language. And particularly if you have different policies that are similar. So for example, in Emporia, we have one policy governing distribution of materials. We have another one on exhibitions and display cases. Those are very similar types of activities, And so when we were revising those policies, we took them both together. And it was quite interesting because when you looked at them together, there's some language in one that was different from similar language in another. And you thought, well, why could you do something in a display case, but you couldn't do that if you were just putting up a poster or distributing literature? So there were conflicts or apparent conflicts. So try to look for consistency. Develop a house style, if you like, as to how you're going to do this. Remember that changes in one policy may necessitate changes in another. That's okay. But it's quite often good if you have a little master plan of your policies to remind yourself, if we change this, then remember that affects something else. It's not a good argument not to change your policy if it needs changing. And then if you're looking at reviewing policies or writing policies, do similar things together. That makes it easier to be consistent in structure and design. Remember that reviewing your policy doesn't mean you have to change it. So I've suggested you want to review every policy at least once every 3 years. You may look at your policy and say, this is absolutely perfect. It's totally fit for purpose. It does not require change. Excellent. Have the board reaffirm that policy, change your authority and date. Well, your authority will stay the same, but change the date on your policy document to reflect the last time the board reaffirmed this. And then you have your up-to-date policy. Remember, it is your policy. You can change it as needed to provide the best service to your community. Another point, everything does not have to be a separate policy. One policy document may include several related top policies. For example, Emporia had both a code of conduct and a cell phone policy. And when we were coming up to review the cell phone policy, which we understand was created when cell phones first came out and were becoming a nuisance in libraries because everyone was talking too much. But when we looked now, there really wasn't a need to have a separate cell phone policy. When we looked at how we had created or redone our code of conduct, that would fall under disturbing behavior or loud noise or something else. So that, in fact, we said we don't even need that policy. It's now covered under something else. Something also, we are required to have a statement about weapons in Kansas and concealed carry that we put into our code of conduct. So that we have a policy on that, if you like. We have a policy statement, but it is contained in the same document that is the code of conduct document. And then just briefly, what policies should you have? The State Library of Kansas Public Library Handbook has the following statement. Policies should cover at least the following facets of the library operation: personnel, materials selection, weeding of obsolete materials, public services, handling of complaints, continuing education, and use of meeting rooms and/or other library facilities. And that is the 2017 Public Library Handbook. And then if we look also at the 2016 state standards for Kansas public libraries, they say that you should have policies on selection, collection management, building and meeting room use, personnel, confidentiality of library records, gifts, appropriate use of online services, continuing education, emergency preparedness and disaster recovery, public services, intellectual freedom, budget and finance, equipment use, patron behavior, capital improvements, surplus property, and trustee bylaws. It's interesting that the public library handbook is not actually the same as the standards for the Kansas public libraries. But anyway, there we are. I want to let you know something. As part of a research project, all library websites in Kansas, all 377 of them, were visited during the fall of 2019. Here are the policies we could find and the number of libraries who actually had that policy available online. And you can see that most libraries had a circulation/public services policy, 116. But then suddenly we dropped down. Only 89 libraries had a room use policy available. Appropriate use of online services, 87. Gifts to the library, 79. Patron behavior, 72. Remember, this is out of 377. Intellectual freedom, 61. Children's Internet Protection Act policy, remember that is required of all Kansas libraries by statute, 59. And equipment use, also 59. Confidentiality of library records, 57. And unattended child policy, 57. Now there were some more in varying numbers, but note that 216 libraries had no policies at all available on their website. So if you're sitting here saying, I'm not confident that we have policies floating around, or I'm feeling terrible because I don't have all my policies online, this is to let you know that you are not alone, that this is very much a trend not to have policies available. Now, I understand just because their policies aren't available online doesn't mean that people don't have them, although there were only a handful of libraries, I think 5 or 6, who actually had a statement letting people know that policies were available at the front desk. But my point here is to say, we are in the business of information. Why would we not let people know what our policies are? And my basic thought on this is, if you don't have your policies online, appropriate policies online, it either implies you don't have policy, or you are not following your own policy, or you are doing things that you don't want people to know about. None of which I think are particularly good options for us as librarians. Now, it is 2:48. I have not actually talked in detail about specific policies that you should have, but I want to pause here to ask if there are questions you have about what I've already suggested to you. And I will say at this point, this is being recorded. I certainly hope. The presentation is being recorded and will be available to you afterwards. I'm also perfectly happy to email you the PowerPoint if you would find that useful. There are more slides with specific policies listed. But if you would like that, if you send me an email, my email address is at the beginning as well. I'm happy to do that. But let me ask here if there are questions I can respond to directly while we're here. And maybe if I stop sharing, I could see the comments. Susan, you have all your policies on your website. My answer would be all appropriate policies. So things that are concerning the public, I would want online. Things that are only concerned with library staff don't need to be on your website. Those should just be internally, you know, they should be freely available to your staff, but they don't need to be publicized to the world. Other questions? You can either unmute your mic and ask me directly or type into the chat. If there are no pressing questions, I can go back and give you 10 minutes on suggested policies. Well, that's a very good question. The question was, what is under continuing education, staff, or neither the Public Library Handbook nor the state standards are clear on that, but it makes sense that it is for library staff, that your continuing education would be there. Great question. Too often it appears that policies are written punitively, what you can't do. I'd suggest rather than they can define what you can't do. I think that's an excellent point. And my example for that, and I keep harping on Emporia Public Library simply because that's the library I've been most involved with for the last 4 years. If you visit emporialibrary.org, emporiapubliclibrary.org, one of the pages towards the right-hand side under a menu is in fact a policies page. And you can see every policy document there. Are they perfect? No, they are not. But you can see what we're trying to do. When you ask about punitive policies, we revised the unattended child policy several months ago. And when I was looking at it, that's what struck me, was the first thing that came up was the thou shalt not. And I said, no, let's change this. So the first thing is, what can people do? So the first item in our unattended child policy is, which unattended children can come to the library? How long can they be there? What can they do? And so that's your first thing, is what is allowable. And then there are restrictions. We'll get to the thou shalt nots. So I think that's a very valid point. You can write your policy any way you like. There is nothing that says you have to start with a thou shalt nots. You can start with the positive things. Absolutely fine. And in fact, much more welcoming, much friendlier policy. Susan, can we borrow from Emporia Public? As far as I'm concerned, absolutely. It may be politic to officially ask the library director, but I can't imagine that Robin Newell will say no. A lot of what I'm talking to you about today is in fact material that we presented together a couple of years ago at KLA, but I've changed things slightly for this. And so we're interested in people having policy and having good policy that works for them. So it's not about plagiarism to the extent of, if you can find a good policy that you can easily adapt, then please don't reinvent the wheel. Look and see. Now, everything we have might not be workable for you, or it might not be done the way that works best for your library. It's okay to change it. Remember, the policy that you have should be personal to you, to your library. It should work for you. You don't want to do anything immoral or illegal, but other than that, how you write your policy is up to you. ALA, yes, I think so. You just asked me, and straight off the top of my head, I'm saying yes. I now can't remember the exact reference, but yes, there are resources in ALA that help you. Every state will be slightly different in requirements, especially concerning things like the Children's Internet Protection Act, which is what requires filtering. But other than that, a lot of what we do is extremely generic. Now, again, I've heard a lot of people say, and I've had students, when I send my students out to interview collections librarians, every time I do that, I have someone come back to say, oh yes, so-and-so doesn't have a collection policy because they don't want to be restricted. I think that's just crazy. A policy should not restrict you. A policy should free you. So your policy, particularly a collections policy, should state, we're going to have things that everybody doesn't agree with. We're going to have things that are more for some populations than other. The library does not necessarily endorse the contents of every single thing in the building, but we reserve the right to provide that, to provide materials that may be controversial, that may be difficult, that may discuss hard topics. That is our function as librarians. We also want to make sure that we have confidentiality statements. That's the one that I actually think, I'm not sure if you're just saying city covers that your city policy necessarily covers your library records. If you think city policy covers you, go find out. Does the city policy mean that you as a librarian are not required to release any library information unless required by a judge or under a subpoena? I'm sorry, that's my phone ringing. We'll just ignore it. I'm not sure that cities necessarily have the same understanding of patron privacy that libraries do. And remember, a lot of what we do is, once your materials are returned, if your library system's set up properly, those vanish and we can't retrieve them. So we can't, even if someone subpoenas us, we could maybe tell them what you have checked out at the moment, but we can't tell them what you checked out last year or the year before. That's just not where we are. It's not what we believe in. And so, is that policy in your library? If you think that everything that needs to be is covered somewhere else, go read those somewhere else policies and make sure. I think you might be surprised at what it's not covering, or interpretations that might be used in a city government that would not necessarily apply the way we would want them to a library. Are there other questions? Or everyone's just sick of sitting in front of their computers, since we've all been doing it now for a week or 2 weeks and we're all frazzled. Well, let me just repeat, thank you for coming. This is obviously a topic that is dear to my heart because I think it is so important. So once again, it's not complex, and you make changes by starting to make changes and starting a review. Start small, start simple, do something that's approachable. By all means, pillage the Emporia website and see what you can find that is useful to you. Check ALA, check your state websites, check your regional library systems. Ask others for help. Nobody is going to say, oh, no, I'm sorry, that's my policy, and we worked on that for months, we're not going to help you. No, particularly if you're a smaller library, if you have a board that is very nice but not very aware, seek as much help as you possibly can to get them. Don't forget that this is an educational process for them as well. If you haven't given your board members or had them read, the State Library of Kansas has a good handbook for library board members. That's a little bit shocking when they read it at first, because I think there's a lot of legal responsibility that people often don't really register when they start this. But use those resources. If you would like a copy of the slides, and if I just pop back to share for 1 second, I have 1 minute. Where are we? Here we go. Let me get rid of my poll there for a second. You can actually see I have a list of policies. I have some questions that just guide you through what sorts of things you should be looking for. It's not rocket science. A lot of this is perfectly reasonable. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be unduly smart. You just have to ask yourself some basic questions and come up with the answers. A lot of it may simply be that you already have these things, you just don't have them written down. Now, my one final parting shot, because it's 3 o'clock and we need to stop, is unwritten policy is not policy. I don't care what anybody says to me. Well, it's an unwritten rule that. No, it's never. Lawyers will laugh in your face. There is no such thing as an unwritten rule. If you want it to be a rule, if you want it to be a policy, it must be written down. So with that little pause there, I'll check this bottom thing. Rip off and duplicate regarding policies. I worked once for a very smart lady who said, if something worked once, if a good idea worked once, it will work again, we shall borrow it. So I think rather than R&D, borrowing. We're librarians after all, we lend things to people, so feel free to borrow would be my suggestion. So thank you for your attendance. If you would like copies of the slides, please drop me an email, asmith37@emporia.edu. I will be happy to send those to you. And also, I think if you have ideas for other webinars you would like to see, please send them our way. You can either send them to me or send them to the Dean, Wusov Zhang, and we'll be happy to hear them. If you want more on policy, or if you want some specific, if you want a writing workshop, can we actually sit down and work through a policy? I'm happy to do that if that's of interest to anyone. So again, if that's of interest, please let us know and we'll do our best to help you out. But meanwhile, go out there and see what policies you have and make sure everybody else knows what your policies are too, because it's a protection for you and your library staffs. So thank you very much.